shape these huge blocks is just amazing.
Without cranes, without machines as we have today, this is a really amazing achievement and probably unrepeatable.
What happens when ancient stone outsmarts modern science? Artificial intelligence just analyzed 500-year-old Inca walls.
It's the buildings of the Incas that survive rather than the buildings that were built 10 years ago.
They're all together working as a unit, and that's the goal. It's a unit moving all together.
And what it found is forcing engineers to rewrite the textbooks. These walls still stand with no mortar, no cement, just massive granite blocks shaped with simple tools and locked so tightly you can't slip a blade between them.
This is a separate rock from this rock, and yet they fit perfectly together. You couldn't fit even a razor blade between these two stones. And this was shaped with stone tools. This speaks to the monumental effort and genius.
The precision is real, and the math of how it was done doesn't add up.
So as an architect, I really wish that I can have like a time machine and go back in time and see how they did it.
Now, AI has dug deeper, revealing patterns and details that leave experts rethinking everything. The Inca Stone Code. The first real shock came not from a dusty ruin or a dramatic excavation, but from engineers at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, running what looked like ordinary stress tests. They fed models of Inca walls into computers and asked one simple question: how do these things stand up when the ground shakes?
Had a funny place in the wall to fill. The thing to do is to look around until you find a stone about that size and shape and bash away the material necessary to fit it into place.
The answer was anything but simple. Those odd, puzzle-like seams between stones weren't decoration or accident. They were a clever way to spread force. By locking stones together in irregular shapes, the builders made walls that absorbed and shared seismic energy far better than straight, rectangular blocks ever could. In short, the Incas had earthquake-resistant design long before the textbooks called it a thing. That idea alone shifts the story from pretty stonework to intentional engineering.
So if you're definitely in country, in Cusco, make an effort to come see this Inca stonework.
Then tech turned up the temperature. Teams used high-resolution 3D scanners to map the faces of entire walls down to tiny bumps and grooves. What they found felt impossible. Contact surfaces, not just tiny spots, but whole square meters where two stones met, matched each other with tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. To put that into everyday terms, that's precision most modern factories struggle to hit on big parts. These weren't stones barely nudged together. They fit like custom-made puzzle pieces so exactly that thermal expansion should, by all logic, have cracked them apart over centuries. Yet the walls still sit, weathered but intact, after earthquakes, floods, and 500 years of sun and cold. Closer inspection added another layer to the mystery. Under the microscope, the stones showed signs of a careful process. Chisel marks smoothed away in deliberate sweeps, surfaces refined in gentle passes. This was not pounding until something fit. It was shaping, testing, refining, step by step, until the joint felt perfect. There's an artistry to that, sure, but more than art. It reads like a measured craft, a method repeated and perfected. AI then walked into the picture and pushed the surprises further. Machine analysis didn't just confirm tight fits and smart shapes.
Archaeologists generally attest that the Inca constructed them, whilst independent researchers believe they are pre-Inca.
It found repeating geometric rules beneath the chaos. The stones follow relationships and patterns that line up with math ideas not formally named until much later in Europe. Crystallography, certain symmetry principles, even hints of spatial algorithms, echoes of concepts that shouldn't have been in the Andes centuries earlier, all showed up in the data. The AI didn't invent this. It read patterns humans had overlooked because, on the surface, the walls look random. Computer models added a final, almost eerie twist. When engineers simulated building the walls, they didn't see a slow, piece-by-piece process of trial and error. Instead, whole wall sections behaved like single, planned systems. That suggests the builders thought in 3 dimensions long before anyone had CAD software. The planning, the sequencing, the way load paths channel through multiple stones, it all points to a design mindset, not just skilled hands improvising in the field. So the big question arrives like a shadow at the edge of the frame. How? Did the Incas have measuring tools or instruments that vanished without a trace? Did they pass down a body of mathematical knowledge orally? A kind of trade secret that never left a paper trail? Or is there something else at play? A lost technique so refined that it looks like magic to modern eyes. What's striking is how sudden the change is. Early structures are competent, solid. Then, quickly, the stonework jumps to levels of precision that rival modern engineering. Not a gentle climb, a leap. This is where the story turns from impressive to unsettling.
A stone, that stone obviously is not in its original place, but it was put in there by the Inca to repair the wall.
These walls are not only proof of skill, they're a puzzle that keeps growing the more it's studied. Empire of Sky and Stone. The Inca Empire was immense, one of the largest the Americas have ever seen. From its capital in Cusco, the empire stretched across the formidable Andes, encompassing modern-day Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, swathes of Chile and Argentina, and even parts of Colombia. Its rise was not instantaneous. Beginning in the early 12th century in the highlands, the Incas had consolidated a vast political entity by the 15th century. A period of explosive growth between 1483 and 1533 saw them incorporate diverse clans, valleys, and mountain passes through conquest and strategic alliances. The Spanish arrival in 1532 marked the beginning of the end, with the last significant resistance crushed by 1572. The sheer scale of Inca achievement is rendered extraordinary by a critical absence. They lacked the wheel for transport, had no iron or steel for tools, and possessed no written alphabet for detailed blueprints. This makes their construction of monumental cities and a continent-spanning road network a profound historical puzzle.
That the original megalithic builders, again, were working on a very profound scale.
The solution lay in a powerful state-controlled labor system and unparalleled engineering ingenuity. Central to all construction was the mita, labor obligation. This was a form of rotational public service where communities contributed manpower to the state as a substitute for taxes. This massive, organized workforce was the engine behind the empire's architectural marvels. Thousands of workers would be deployed to quarry stone, transport building materials, and execute complex engineering projects. In return for this service, the state provided security and distributed resources during times of famine or conflict, creating a reciprocal, though state-directed, relationship. The most critical innovation for large-scale construction was the road network, the Chapak Ñan. This was far more than a simple path. It was the logistical artery of the empire, essential for moving the stone and resources needed for its cities. This vast system of highways and trails connected distant quarries to construction sites and administrative centers. Without wheeled carts, transport was accomplished by human power and llama caravans. The roads were engineered with features that facilitated this movement: stone-paved surfaces, stairways cut into sheer rock faces to navigate cliffs, and drainage systems to keep them functional in all weather. This network allowed for the efficient movement of massive stone blocks, some weighing tons, which were precisely shaped and fitted without mortar. Relay stations, or tambos, dotted the roads, serving as waypoints for the chasqui messengers and, crucially, for the laborers and engineers moving across the empire. This infrastructure enabled the state to marshal and direct the mita workforce wherever it was needed, from building the terraced citadel of Machu Picchu to maintaining the grand temples of Cusco. Ultimately, the Inca Empire's construction prowess was a triumph of social organization, the mita system, and logistical genius embodied by the Kapakñan, which together compensated for the lack of old-world technologies and allowed them to literally move mountains. Moving the impossible. How did the Incas move and position giant stones, some weighing hundreds of tons? The logistical challenges are almost incomprehensible. Moving a single 200-ton block would require hundreds or even thousands of people working in perfect coordination. Using simple levers to lift it would be a monumental task, while dragging it across flat ground would demand a small army of pullers. The reality, however, is that the Incas rarely worked with flat terrain. The Andes presented slopes, and hauling an ultra-heavy block up a significant incline would require an exponentially greater effort, potentially necessitating a workforce of immense scale for just one stone. When you consider sites like Sacsayhuaman, which feature thousands of these megalithic blocks, the scale of the required labor force becomes staggering. Where would so many workers have come from? Crucially, where would they have slept, cooked, and been fed? Such a massive, sustained operation should have left behind substantial evidence. The remains of giant, temporary camps, extensive supply chains, and roads specially reinforced to bear incredible weights. Yet, this infrastructure is precisely what is missing. Archaeologists have searched for the obvious signs: large encampments, massive hearths, extensive food storage pits, or heavily built roadbeds.
These weren't just barns for storing food. They were sophisticated silos that were critical to the well-being of the people.
But few, if any, have been found at the scale the construction seems to demand. There is no evidence of tens of thousands of workers living in permanent staging areas around these sites. Furthermore, no traces of massive earthen ramp systems, which would be essential for rolling the largest blocks into place, have been discovered. The perfectly fitted stones are here. The expected, visible infrastructure for how they arrived is not. This mystery is compounded by another fascinating detail. Many of these megaliths were intricately carved and shaped into their final forms at the quarry, before their journey began. This represents an enormous risk. A single crack, chip, or mishap during transport would mean months of meticulous work lost. The fact that these finely carved stones arrived intact at their destinations suggests their transport method was not a brute force ordeal, but a controlled, careful, and highly precise process. The blocks weren't just roughly dragged, they were moved in a way that preserved their delicate edges and complex shapes, arriving ready to be fitted with their neighbors like pieces of a giant, perfect puzzle. When you trace the routes these stones took from their quarries to the building sites, the story becomes even more compelling. Some stones originated from locations separated by deep valleys and rugged ridges, terrain that would challenge modern machinery, even with paved roads. Other blocks appear to have been moved along paths with severe inclines, where gravity is a constant adversary and a single slip could spell disaster. Intriguingly, archaeological evidence, such as sediment analysis, even suggests that some of these monumental moving operations were conducted during the rainy season, a time when rivers swell, paths turn to mud, and the landscape becomes treacherous. Despite these conditions, the supply of stone seems to have been continuous and reliable, operating year-round without apparent interruption. The walls themselves are one mystery, but the shapes cut into those walls reveal something even more systematic.
The stonework is truly mesmerizing to look at, every block being individually shaped and cut to fit the ones surrounding it.
Those trapezoid doors and windows, so often pointed to in photos of Inca ruins, aren't just a neat style choice. When engineers and archaeologists ran the numbers, they found that these angled openings do real engineering work. The slanted sides funnel seismic forces away from the weakest points. Instead of letting a quake punch through a rectangle's corners, the trapezoid spreads the load so nothing focuses in one tiny spot and snaps. What's striking is that the math behind this wasn't part of the modern toolkit until people started using finite element analysis in the 1960s. That's the computer-driven method engineers use to see where stress builds up in a structure. Yet 500 years earlier, the Incas were doing the same thing with stone and sweat, only without computers. The same earthquake-smart choices show up everywhere, from huge fortress walls down to small, simple houses. That kind of consistency across the empire tells a story beyond one clever mason. It points to a system, rules, training, and standards spread across thousands of miles. Builders in different valleys, working decades apart, were using the same tricks. That means knowledge was being passed on, taught, and enforced. Not a handful of geniuses working alone. A culture that knew how to teach building like a science. Then the plot lifts its head toward the sky. Many Inca sites line up with the sun, moon, and stars in ways that are too precise to be random. Take Machu Picchu. The Temple of the Sun has windows and niches that catch sunlight at key times of year. At the solstices, light moves through the temple in deliberate ways, markers that could tell priests when the year changed. Nearby is the Intihuatana,
of the Intihuatana stone, which is one of the primary structures found at the Inca citadel site of Machu Picchu.
the carved stone often called the hitching post of the sun. It's a calibrated point. Shadows fall in predictable patterns and could have been used to mark important dates. Elsewhere, Ollantaytambo and Pisac, for example, stones and sight lines point to solstices or align with particular stars. The Incas tracked the moon too, not just the sun. Lunar cycles were vital for farming. Which days to sow, which to harvest, which to perform rituals to ask for good weather. The Pleiades and the Southern Cross weren't just pretty dots. They were tools, timing signals and seasonal guides that helped a civilization keep food stores full and festivals on schedule. That astronomical knowledge didn't live only in stone. The Coricancha in Cusco, a dedicated observatory and temple, served as a hub. Priests and astronomers recorded events, watched the sky, and translated what they saw into calendars and instructions for the empire. Weather patterns were tied into all of this. Predicting rains, frost, or dry spells mattered as much as shoring up a wall. In short, architecture, astronomy, agriculture, and ritual were braided together into a working system. What's unnerving is how all these threads, earthquake engineering, empire-wide standards, and star watching, come together cleanly. The Incas didn't treat stonework as decoration and sky watching as a hobby. They built practical science out of both. Walls that survive quakes and storms, doors shaped to steer forces away, and temples that mark the solstice like a clock. Put those pieces side by side, and it looks less like accidental genius and more like planned, shared knowledge. So now the questions pile up. How did this system spread so wide and stay so accurate? Were there schools of builders? Manuals of rules carried by hand, not paper? Or were methods taught through apprenticeships so exact that every student left with the same toolbox of tricks? Whatever the answers, one thing is clear. The Inca way of building linked earth and sky in ways that kept whole communities safe and fed, and it did so with a level of method and skill that still surprises engineers today. The stone that reads the sky. Understanding the Inca system requires understanding its centerpiece. At first glance, the Intihuatana stone looks like a hewn boulder sitting on a ridge.
This ancient stone is known as the hitching post of the sun. It served as a tool for astronomical observations by the Incas.
Up close, it refuses to be simple. That lump of granite is a tool, a calendar, and a kind of analog computer all rolled into one. Its faces, cuts, and edges catch light and shadow in a way that reads like a clock, only this clock keeps track of the sky. Placed on one of Machu Picchu's highest spots, the Intihuatana stone was put where the mountains and sky meet. From there, a watcher could see how light moved across valleys and peaks. The stone's angles throw shadows in exact ways on the solstices and equinoxes. On certain days of the year, a shadow will sit right where the stone's carvers intended, marking a moment that mattered. When to plant, when to harvest, when to hold a ceremony. That's practical farming sense, and it's planning on a grand scale. People whose survival depends on knowing the seasons built their calendar into rock. But the Intihuatana stone is not just a flat sundial. It works in 3 dimensions. Different faces catch the sun at different heights in the sky. Carvings and ledges produce shadow lines that move in predictable paths. Read them together, and the stone gives more than a date. It gives a picture of the sun's travel across the year. Modern tests using AI show the angles aren't random. They match calculations that would later be described by spherical trigonometry. Math that the Incas hadn't written down, in a way Europeans would recognize. In plain words, the stone solves 3D geometry problems with pure stonecraft. That blend of math and craft sits next to faith. The Intihuatana stone was tied to Inti, the sun god. Priests used it during rituals meant to keep the sun coming back, to bless crops, and to renew the link between rulers and the heavens. Ceremony and calendar were the same thing. Religion that also organized work, food, and politics. The stone told time, and it told stories. Now comes the part that makes specialists frown. Carved patterns near the Intihuatana and at other Inca sites map out star groups and sky events with scary precision. Some carvings match the Pleiades, the Southern Cross, or other constellations. Others line up with points on the horizon only at certain dates and from particular viewing spots. Those are useful for timing rituals and farming, but some alignments point toward dimmer objects, faint star clusters or nebula-like shapes that, to most eyes, would have been almost impossible to spot without magnification. Did the Incas somehow see or know about these faint sky objects? Were their star maps symbolic, not literal, art that looks like a map, but actually meant something else? Or is there a missing piece in the story? Lost lenses, vanished instruments, or centuries-old knowledge passed down in a way that left no written trace? Inca builders weren't guessing. Where others might have put a decorative notch, they placed a precise marker. What looks like an ornament often turns out to be an instruction. Some carvings encode relationships between the sun, moon, and stars that match real astronomical timing. Others seem to work like a manual, an encoded guide for reading the sky from specific hilltops. So the Intihuatana does more than mark a season. It is a crossroads where practical needs, sacred beliefs, and sharp observation meet. Farmers get dates, priests get rituals, rulers get legitimacy. All of it is written in stone with such care that the line between engineering and ceremony blurs. That blurring is the real mystery. How did people without written equations build a 3-dimensional instrument that hides math beneath ceremony? How did they pass the methods across a vast empire so that the same careful marks appear in different places? Whatever the answer, the Intihuatana forces a rethink. Machu Picchu is not just a set of ruins. It is a working brain, carved, positioned, and tuned to the sky. And every shadow that falls on it still speaks of a people who turned the movement of stars into tools for life below. Architecture that thinks. The Incas built their stone walls using a method known as ashlar masonry. In plain terms, ashlar means each stone was cut so precisely that it fits its neighbor like a handmade puzzle piece. No mortar, no glue, just perfect cuts and gravity doing the rest. The stones sit together so tightly that you can't slide a knife blade between them. That kind of fit isn't decoration, it's engineering. Each block's weight holds the wall steady, and the tiny gaps that do exist help the whole structure breathe and move. A secret strength when the ground starts to shake. Where the land was steep, they turned the slopes into flat, usable ground. Terracing wasn't only for farming, it was foundation work. The Incas carved broad steps into the mountain and packed them with layers that drained water and held soil. On top of those terraces, they built fields and houses, The terraces also acted like giant terraces for the city itself. They stopped erosion, slowed rainwater, and made steep mountains feel flat enough to live on. That insight, treat the slope as part of the city, meant food production and architecture could live in the same space. Then there's Cyclopean masonry, the other extreme. While ashlar shows tiny exact fits, Cyclopean work uses huge irregular stones stacked together. Think of giant boulders that seem to lock into one another. This technique is common at places meant to look unshakable, fortress walls and massive retaining walls. Those irregular shapes interlock in ways that scatter force instead of letting it focus on a single weak point. It's rougher to look at than ashlar, but it's a different kind of genius. Use whatever the mountain gives you and make it stronger by pairing shape with mass. All this would have been useless without water control. High in the Andes, rain can arrive as a torrent. The Incas faced this not by chance, but by design. Their drainage systems are everywhere. Open canals, hidden channels under plazas, and carefully sloped stones that steer water away from buildings. They layered fill with sand and gravel to let water drain quickly, then placed large stones on top so paths and platforms stayed dry. Where modern builders might pour concrete, the Incas used graded layers, channels, and gravity. Simple physics arranged with thought. Put those pieces together, and a pattern emerges. Ashlar makes precise, interlocking faces that resist shaking. Cyclopean blocks add mass and force scattering where needed. Terraces turn slopes into usable platforms and stop erosion. Drainage keeps rain from washing everything away. These techniques aren't separate tricks. They're a system. The Incas thought of the mountain, the weather, and the long haul. They shaped stone to meet the land, and shaped the land to hold their stone. That's why Machu Picchu still stands. Not because of mystery alone, but because generations of builders used smart methods that worked with nature, not against it. AI versus the Inca Code. Researchers fed full 3D scans of Inca sites into top-tier AI systems, the kind that chew through geometry and spit out patterns humans miss. What came back didn't just add a new footnote to history, it threw the footnote away and handed us a new chapter. First, the AI flagged the joints between stones as something far smarter than tight carving. Think of those seams not as simple fits, but as active parts of the wall. Engineered interfaces. When the models simulated earthquakes, the joints didn't just hold. They behaved like pieces of a designed material that changes how waves move. In plain words, the walls seem to steer and dampen quake energy the way modern metamaterials do. That's a field that only got momentum in the last few decades. Engineers now design shapes that force waves to bend, cancel, or pass harmlessly around a structure. The AI models suggest the Incas were getting similar results out of stone and geometry 5 centuries earlier. Mind-bending? Absolutely. The next result was even stranger. When AI mapped roads, plazas, and sacred sites together, it found repeating geometric relationships across huge distances. The layout of cities, the lines of roads, and the placement of temples formed patterns that aren't just pretty. They look like a network that channels information, light, shadow, horizon alignments, and even seismic signals. In simulations, signals traveling along these routes produce echoes and timings that line up with astronomical events and with the timing of certain local quakes. In other words, the landscape itself starts to look like an information system, a continent-scale mesh that encodes timing and space. Scientists pushing these models say to fully test them, you need computational power most labs don't have. The math grows weird fast, and some ask for quantum-level simulation to capture all the interactions. That's not because the Incas had quantum computers, of course. It's because the patterns the AI found are complex enough that classical computing strains to model them in full. So we get this odd claim. The geometry in the Andes behaves like a system modern science only just learned how to design. and only recently learned how to model. This is where facts and imagination meet awkwardly. The scans and the AI don't prove the Incas worshipped physics. They do show an uncanny level of pattern, intent, and repeatability that our current tools struggle to explain. Were the builders experimenting with stone properties, trial and error teaching, or a body of lost techniques? Or did they stumble on rules of nature and patterns that simply work again and again? Whatever the explanation, the takeaway is clear and sharp. AI didn't just confirm Inca genius. It amplified the mystery. The stones, the roads, the temples, all of them now read like parts of a system that thinks in waves, timing, and geometry. And that changes everything we thought we understood about who the Incas were and what they could do.